So thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Megan Woolerton. I am the owner of Life Force Wellness, and it's been a journey to get here, which we'll share in a little bit. But I'm joined today with Hannah. Hannah, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, of course. So my name is Hannah Burns Dunham. I am in Birmingham, Alabama. I am a chemical engineer, and I started my career in the pulp and paper industry, I guess, Lord, 10 years ago now or something like that. So I started as a co-op in college. I worked for a company for a year on and off, and then started back there full time. I met my husband there. We eventually switched companies and we moved to Chattanooga, Tennessee. And I worked my way up to department manager there. I was in charge of 120 people, a really big department in the mill. And then a couple weeks after I got that promotion, I found out I was pregnant and decided to take a little bit of a career break and get my master's in industrial and organizational psychology. And then in June of last year, I started this business. And basically, what I do is individual coaching with female engineers that are struggling to navigate male-dominated industries. So basically, like exactly what I needed when I was in their shoes, that's kind of what I provide for them. So, yeah, I'm really excited to be here with you today.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's so funny. So, for those joining, Hannah and I have actually never met in person. We met through a mutual connection on LinkedIn. So, I highly encourage just reaching out and making those connections. And when we talked, we had very similar stories. I actually came out of college with business administration and marketing here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And it was during this Marcellus shale boom that was going on. And so my very first job out of the gate was doing PR, basically going around to these small little communities and towns and telling them like we're not here to pollute your water and do all this crazy stuff. We used to joke it was like sex, drugs, and instead of rock and roll, it's Marcellus shale drilling. Um, so it was a wild time, especially as everything was very new. Regulations were still being formed around this, and of course, in that oil and gas industry, it's extremely male dominated. And then I
Mhm.
eventually worked for a service provider that provide the housing and the trucking for the guys that live on the drill site that they stay in. So I was really integrated with those rig hands and the tool pushers that lived, ate, breathed, slept, oil and gas. So that was grueling. Those drilling rigs run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I'm anticipated to be on call 24/7. And so I experienced total meltdown and burnout. And when I had an opportunity to leave, I kind of got my life back in order. I worked with a health and life coach at the time, really learned everything I could in health and wellness. And I sit here with a bunch of certifications as a personal trainer, a health coach, a nutrition coach, positive psychology practitioner. And now,
Mhm.
much like you, Hannah, what I think really sparked our interest in our conversation is that we both went, who did I need when I was in the thick of it? And at the
Yeah.
time, I wasn't looking for a burnout coach. I wasn't looking for a wellness coach. I was just trying to survive. And so made Life Force Wellness as a way for companies to really buy into their employees and help them navigate kind of the struggles I had. And that's really what today is about. What Hannah and I would like to do is basically share our experiences and some of the top lessons we learned trying to navigate those male dominated industries. How did we survive? What really helped us when things seemed really bleak? How did we climb out the other side of this with more of a positive attitude that might help you along your way, especially if you're someone who right now is getting into an industry that tends to be more male dominated. So,
Mhm.
Hannah, I'll let you kick it off. Give us a story or a lesson. What's that first lesson you'd like to share with people, and how did you learn it?
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna start off with a big one. And this one is the one that is most near and dear to my heart because I think it caused me the most heartache in my 10 years in manufacturing, and that is how to get paid equally. So we're gonna start there. So let's talk about just pay negotiation. In the beginning, so I had kind of a strange start in manufacturing. When I came back to work at that company full time right out of college, the day I showed up there, they promoted me to a shift supervisor position, which was two pay levels above the entry level process engineer that I had signed the offer for. So, so I was really, at first I was like, so does this mean that I get the pay that goes with it, or how does that work? I immediately asked because I couldn't help myself. And I was told, no, you're in a training period, you know, like basically be thankful for this opportunity and all of that. So I kind of, you know, being naive in the industry, okay, we'll see how this goes for a while. Continued to bring it up and asked, and I'll be totally honest, at 22 was crying in every meeting that, you know, like just very emotional about like why, you know, I was working Southern swing shift. So I had one weekend off a month, was working crazy hours. Why am I not, all my friends that, you know, started in that job with me at the same time were working, you know, 7 to 4 every single day, going out, hanging out on the weekends and stuff. And I'm like in the middle of the night most nights. So I was very like confused about why am I putting all this extra effort in and not getting paid for it. You know, again, told I was greedy. Finally, I think at about the 1 year mark, I was given one pay level bump up and was very much told like, be thankful for that. And so it wasn't until I'd pretty much about packed my bags at the 2 year mark. And when they gave me that promotion and then offered me another job, and I was pretty much ready to go at that point. So all that to say, and then going into the next, you know, job site that I had, also being underpaid and knowing that I was, because my husband's team had people at the same level that I was at, and he knew what they made, and I wasn't making nearly as much as them. So it was very obvious to me. But I think the number one thing that I learned from that experience was that I could have taken away, and I think really would have done something good for me, was to be able to communicate my worth in a way that translated in the room to them versus very much just being like, well, I want more money. Why aren't you giving it to me? Like that was very much always the confusion to me. So then, but that didn't really translate to them as far as, you know, what my value and worth was. I shouldn't have had to be fighting for it. Of course, that's not fair, but you can't let that keep you from playing the game anyways. So you really have to, number one, learn how to communicate your worth and your value in a concise way. What you don't want to do is get in the room and start going on and on and on about all these contributions that you have in not a structured way. It's everybody is going to get bogged down in the details and going through those individual projects, and it really takes away from what you're trying to get across, which is the top 2 or 3 things that you've contributed to this company that speaks to the value, your value being higher than what your pay is. So that's the number one thing that I would, you know, share as a success strategy, is understand how to communicate your value proposition. And the way you can do that is think about the contributions that you have within your job role, and then also outside of your job role. I think especially as women, we often like take a ton of responsibilities on that never were in your job description to begin with, or you take them on, or you never give them up when you do get promoted. So, you know, those kind of like tasks just kind of follow you on forever, but they're not even in your roles and responsibilities anymore. So it's really important to think about those 2 things. What are your biggest contributions in your job? And then the things that fall outside of your job. And then also having a good understanding of what the market value is for your position is really important. And this often cannot be done by asking other women, because their pay is usually, you know, under the market value as well. So I would suggest, as hard as it is, either asking somebody who has like a breadth of knowledge as far as market value, like myself or you, where kind of they are in the lineup as far as, you know, I work with a lot of female engineers, so I know kind of the market value for different stages in someone's career. And then as if you, when you're going into the situation where you're like saying what that number is, I think the biggest thing that I could, you know, impart on you today is like, when you say that number, do not give them an out. So it's very easy to want to say, I want $145,000. But if that's not possible, then then it's okay. We can talk about it later. Well, as soon as you say, if that's not possible, they're going to say, you're right, it's not possible. You're giving them an excuse. You're introducing doubt into the room that doesn't need to be there. So that would be my number one thing if I could teach anybody, is to just say, I'm expecting 145. This is my value. This is my worth. This is why I think this number matches what I'm contributing to the company, and stop there. And then depending on what they say, either, you know, maybe it's a home run, maybe they say, and that's something we can work towards in 6 months. And then we go towards, okay, what does it look like as far as the communication between you and I for the next 6 months as I work towards this promotion, and getting a clear and defined action plan for what that looks like. You don't want to leave the room just saying, okay, 6 months, we'll revisit this. No, what does it look like from now until then in order to set yourself up for success to get that promotion in 6 months? So those are my biggest tips for pay negotiation.
No, and I
All right,
think those
give it
are,
to you.
yeah, I think those are so great. And I think something that a lot of women that I work with struggle with is dealing with this imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
We listen to that feedback of, oh, you should be thankful for what you have, and that whole piece of knowing your worth. I think if your great advice there is, don't look at it as maybe my personal worth, because some of us tend to undervalue ourselves, but looking at it from a market value, given the position and the job that I'm doing, we all have a job description. And there are resources out there. I think one that's going viral right now is that Fishbowl app going on there. What are other people in this position in a similar industry making? And it's nice to take that data to the employer. And now the emotion is out of it. It's not, I feel like I should make this. No, market research. I have hard data. This is what this position is worth. And it doesn't matter if it's me, a woman in this position, or a male, this position pays X. And I think
Yep.
that really helps us to step outside of ourselves.
Yes.
And that was a hard lesson, even for me. I would say that I had a similar experience where I was the field manager. I had 27 field guys that worked under me, 3 field managers that worked under me, 7 people in an office, coordinators that worked for me, and yet
Mhm.
I was paid less than the field guys I was to manage,
Yeah.
even the salaried ones. And it was
Mhm.
very obvious that the owner of this company was undervaluing the women in the organization, because he would make comments, no joke. We had one issue where one of our guys had the day off, but he had this specialty and we really needed him to come into to work that day. And
Mhm.
so he came into my office and said, I need you to call Scott. And I said, well, today is Scott's day off. I'll see what I can do. I call Scott. He said, I'm sorry, my wife went to work and we canceled our childcare. So I'm at home with the kids. My
Yeah.
boss went off. Why isn't she at home with the kids? Like, it was totally the woman's responsibility to
Of
be at
course.
home with the kids. And that
Mhm.
became so apparent. And he said that in a room full of other office women. And we all went off on him. Like,
Well,
you
good
can't
for y'all.
yeah, you can't say this. Like, what are you doing? Like, this is the
Mhm.
message. And so it became very apparent when we all started realizing we're being underpaid for the
Mhm.
position we had. We knew it's because he already has this mentality that women are worth X, women's place is here, a man's place is there.
Yeah.
And that was a hard thing to overcome. And so, really looking at this was the position, I think would have helped me. But
Yeah.
also, when you're in that environment, it is setting those healthy boundaries.
Mhm.
It is saying, no, I am worth this. This is what the job description says. I really started to look at my job as a contract, because that's really what it is. You
Yeah.
hand me a job
That's
description that
Mhm.
I'm going to complete these tasks. I'm going to perform at a certain level. And in exchange, you are going to pay me the equivalence for
Yep.
that job. And it
Yep.
doesn't matter who's there in that job, but it requires setting those boundaries. I think sometimes we feed too much into those other duties as assigned,
Yeah.
or we constantly, because we're in that environment where we feel like we have to prove our worth. I was, I would be out at 10 o'clock at night shopping for supplies for a house that was going out. And that means shopping for everything you would need for a new home: bed sheets, pots and pans, cookware, dishes. Everything for a house for somebody. And it's like, oh, this has to go out at 7 a.m. tomorrow. Can you run to Walmart and get all the supplies last minute thrown at me? You
Yeah.
know? And of course, the shopping and stuff was thrown on the women folk and
Yeah.
not always the men folk. And, at the time, I wanted to prove myself.
Yeah.
I really wanted to have that good performance evaluation. And I didn't want them to come back and say, well, you didn't step up when we really needed you. And so
Mhm.
I let them burn me out. And
Yeah.
I would say my biggest advice for anyone in those male dominated industries is that once you understand your worth, your value, and that this is contractual, that
Mhm.
they're being paid for a service, or you're getting paid to perform a service that you've agreed to, then you need to set those boundaries and go, that is outside the scope of my work.
Yeah.
if you want me to take on these additional responsibilities, this is what it means.
Mhm.
This is what I expect out of this. And communicating that clearly. And again, I think the big thing, especially, I hate to say this, but because we're women, we have to take the emotion out of it. Because
Yeah.
if we show up, like you said, always in tears and frustrated and angry, and that women's wrath and that woman's scorn is how they're viewing it, they don't tend to take it as seriously as here's the hard facts and data.
Yeah, and
I'm not talking.
practicing, I think, yeah, practicing the conversation is one good way to kind of like help manage your emotions. And also, like, it's okay that your emotions come up, especially when it's something that for me, I had so much resentment about the fact that I was underpaid. So then, that often came up in the room as emotions, but like knowing what to do when those emotions come up, like take a break. You don't have to continue on through it. Just say, like, can I come back in 5 minutes? Like, reschedule the meeting if you have to. Like, those are things that you're allowed to do. Like, nobody ever told me, like, oh, it's actually okay. You don't have to continue on in this meeting if you can't gather yourself. Like, it's a very emotional subject to be underpaid chronically. So take a break. Like, it's fine if you're not like ready to talk about this right then. But then also just like preparing yourself for the conversation is a really good way to like, it's basically a performance versus something in the room that you're trying to make up in the moment, and that can often like really be helpful as far as like taking the like emotions out of it. And I love what you said about like it's a contract. Like, remember that, like, this, if they didn't pay you, would you show up? No. Like that, no, you wouldn't. So like don't get paid under what you're supposed to be for that job either. Like, it's the same idea. So I like that a lot. Okay, what's your number one success strategy for women in male dominated industries?
So I would say number one success strategy is clearly communicating those expectations for the
Hmm.
job and managing them. And again, it comes back to that communicating. So once I think like you have the first great step of set those, set the expectations, know your value, and then from there set the boundaries and
Hmm.
know when it's time to come back to the negotiating table to discuss what's next. How do
Yeah.
we progress? Because I feel like as women, we just go, oh, yeah, I'll take that on. I'll take that on. Yeah, I'll step up and do it. And we kind of leave our worth behind. And then we look back a year later and go, man, I'm doing the job of three people and only getting paid for like one. So
Yeah.
I think, your first step, I would definitely take it is know what that, value is for the position I'm taking on. And then once I understand the position, let's manage the expectations for that position and its growth. Let's come up with a growth plan together and make sure that we are communicating that clearly so that we don't take on more than we can bite off.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I like that a lot. I think, you need to kind of enter every room with a list of non-negotiables like that you have written down. And I think you should do that for the job that you're taking too, which is this is kind of like this is what I'm willing to accept within and with outside of the roles and responsibilities of this job. And it's not going to go past that, and I think there's an opportunity in every room to kind of like explain or just hold on to those boundaries, whatever they are. So I really like that one for sure.
Yeah, we just had a comment here. The minute you realize that you're being taken for a ride by your manager or company, is it even worth sticking around? I would say for me, let's have the conversation first. As soon as I realize that, because we get wrapped up, there's a lot of growth, you get a pandemic thrown at you, people are asked to take on more. Sometimes it just happens and we all just don't even realize it's going on. So I like to give the company and the managers the benefit of the doubt. But once we
Mhm.
come to the table and we communicate, here's the position, here's the expectations. What are you expecting of me beyond that? Let's discuss what is the new role, what is the new pay structure, what is the new growth plan for that. If they don't seem willing to communicate that or negotiate that, like much to your point, they kind of give you that, well, you should just be thankful for what you have and that we didn't lay you off during this period. Then I think it's time to maybe search for somewhere else to go. I mean, if they're not willing to negotiate in good faith, then no, I wouldn't stick around.
Yeah. And I think it is important, like in those situations, to, as hard as this is going to sound impossible when I say it, but to not take it so personally. It is a systemic issue. So you're not the only but one facing these problems where you feel like you're being taken for a ride, where you're, taking on more responsibility than everyone else, or not being paid what you deserve. That is almost every female in male dominated industry. So I'm just trying to take the personal hurt out of it. It's actually a much bigger problem than just you. So I think, I, like you said, having the conversation and giving them the opportunity to right those wrongs is really important. And then if not, then you realize, well, this company does not anymore align with my values, once I've given them the option to change what's going on in my work life. And now I need to find a company that does. So I totally agree with that.
Yeah. And I think that feeds in, if you don't mind, I'm going to give my second point here.
Yeah, go ahead.
And that is working on your own mental resilience. So something I've really learned, I've studied a lot of positive psychology and been certified as a practitioner of positive psychology, is that growth mindset and that mental resilience. Because let's be honest, when we enter male dominated fields, it's a different culture. They really do develop their own culture, their own rules, their own rituals. And for example, especially in the oil and gas and in the construction industries, and I don't know if you've had this with manufacturing, but there's a certain level of hazing that almost goes on. And it doesn't matter if you're male or female, you've got the new guy running around looking for like, fluid for the headlights or the ID10T form. And
Totally.
there is a level of hazing. And I think that as women, there's two things that goes on. Either one, and I've seen both. I've seen women come in and go, "Oh, these guys, they're always messing with me," and they take it very personally and
Mhm.
they break down. Or I see the guys actually treat the women with kid gloves. And something unique about me is for years I was a competitive boxer. So I used
Say
to get in the
that.
ring and spar with guys because there's not a lot of female fighters out there. So I'd have to fight the
Yeah.
guys. The ones that would make me the most mad are the men that would get in the ring to spar me and they wouldn't throw a punch.
Yeah.
They wouldn't. They'd be like, "Oh, I don't want to hurt you, and I want to be nice to you because you're a woman." That would make me more mad. I would throw them out of the ring and say, "Bring me someone that's willing to fight because you're not helping me grow."
Yeah.
When I get in the ring for real for a trophy for an award, a woman is going to get in this ring and she's going to try to knock my stinking head off. And you're not doing me
Yeah.
any favors by not throwing
Totally.
punches. And
Hmm.
so I found it more offensive if I was treated with kid gloves than not treated as a true equal in the ring. And the same thing
Totally.
came true when I entered the oil and gas field. When the guys would start to mess with me and crack a joke or try to like trick me with, "Hey, you got to fill out this ID10T form," or "We need you to go find windshield wiper fluid," or, having a certain level of like humor in it and understand it's part of their ritual. I'm not saying
Hmm.
put up with harassing. I'm not saying putting up with abuse, but there is a certain level of almost like a ritualistic hazing that goes on with the new people. And you should almost wear that as a badge of honor. We can't be overly
Totally.
sensitive and let our emotions play into it on, "Oh, they're picking on me." Because when you take a step back, you can see, "Oh, they mess with that guy just as much as they mess with me." In fact, this is like they're integrating me as part of the tribe in some
Yes.
sense by doing that. And so building up that mental resiliency. And when they cross a line, go back to the first rule I said, having those healthy boundaries. If I'd enter
Hmm.
a site and somebody would say, "Hey, Miss Megan, hop on up here on my desk," I was quick to come back on, "I don't see you asking Billy over here to hop up on your desk. Like, I'll keep my feet on the floor, sir. Be ready to come back." Or you get
Hmm.
the, "Hey, sweetheart," and you come back, "Hey, sugar britches," and they kind of take, yeah, it's uncomfortable. Let's use names. Like, not getting so offended or constantly wanting to run to somebody else, but standing on your own 2 feet and not being afraid to quip back when appropriate and handle the situation in a mature way that kind of fits the culture. I
Yeah.
would say so that second point that I would make is really build that mental resiliency and sometimes take some of those jokes and some of those punches as
Hmm.
really being integrated into that kind of culture and not
Totally.
as an offensive, "We're trying to push you out."
Yeah, also like see it from their perspective, which is they've often not worked with many women in this industry whatsoever. Probably the only women that they've been around that are around your age is, granddaughters, daughters, their wives when they were in high school and stuff like that. So think about it from that perspective. And their intent in like those joking and those kind of like hazing rituals and stuff is very much to like get to know you. Like, oh, and of course, again, like you said, don't accept the abuse, know what your boundaries are as far as what you are and are not willing to accept. But most of the lighthearted joking and the picking on you and stuff like that really is their attempt to kind of integrate you into their world and like show you that like, hey, we're all in this together, we're all, we want you to be a part of it. So I think like changing your mindset from like they're picking on me to like they're just trying to include me and this is like their funny way of doing it, I think can really make the difference. And actually the most fun I've ever had is with operators like riffing off each other, joking back and forth. Like it is nothing but fun when you get to that level of like security with them and stuff. So, I mean, if you can get there, it makes every day at work more fun, in my opinion. So,
Yeah. And you almost don't want to say, but I will say, like, once you're in that, you realize sometimes in some of these industries, it's like working with a bunch of 12-year-old boys, and they really don't
totally.
mean anything by it. Honestly, most of them, when you call them out on it, they are so apologetic. It's
Mhm.
just, they men and women have different languages. Let's be honest. We really do kind of have just a different sense of humor. We speak little different languages. And when they're, in a male dominated and they're just around men all the time, you know, a certain
Yeah.
culture builds up. And so rather than trying to come in and throw off their day and now make it about, hey, you need to treat us a certain way. No, we need to be willing to integrate into that culture. I mean, you're
Yeah.
entering this industry. I think you should have a certain level of knowledge of knowing what you're getting into and be ready to build up that mental resiliency. Again, not putting up with abuse. When they cross a line, you also have to be willing to stand up and say, you've crossed a line.
Yeah.
You have to go back to point one that I made. Healthy boundaries have to rule
Mhm.
first.
Yeah, totally.
So
Yeah.
what do
So
you got for our next point?
yeah, so my next one, I want to talk about kind of like career advocacy and kind of being in charge of your own career. So I think I've heard this from a lot of clients and also just friends of mine in the pulp and paper industry where they are interested in the next position. And then for whatever the reason may be, like their boss or somebody in position of authority from that for them has said, well, I'm not sure that that's the right career path for you. Like maybe something less in the spotlight, maybe an individual contributor role. I don't know if you have the right skills for that job. And then they say, okay, then that's not for me. Doesn't matter what my career goals were in the past. Now I'm going to try to figure out what to do next because this person in authority over you told you that that's not the path for you. So I just want to mainly give you some pointers as far as like how to navigate this situation. So I was in a similar situation like this. I'd been in an environmental supervisor role for 3 months at the new company that my husband and I moved to, and I was bored out of my mind. But I was doing a really good job, and my boss was a very strong female who I loved working for. And I knew that she valued me on her team a lot, and she, had plans to promote me into her position when she moved on and all of that kind of stuff. But ultimately, I knew that that position was not right for me, but I was terrified to tell her that. And she had been often like, wondering if I was interested in getting back into the operations world and like kind of discouraging that in me. So I was honestly like stressed about the conversation that I was going to like try to get a position in the operations department. And here's what I did. This is called taking charge of your career. I went to her boss and I told him what my plans were as far as going for this assistant superintendent position in the pulp mill. And I said, but I'm terrified to tell her, honestly. Like, I don't want to disappoint her. I really value her in my life. She's a great mentor for me. And he said, this is what we're going to do. You and I are going to go into her office and I'm going to pretend like I've never heard this plan. You're going to tell me what the plan is. You're going to tell her in the same room, and I'm going to pretend like I didn't know. And then I'm going to support the hell out of you. And then she has no option but to support you as well in those endeavors. And that's exactly what happened. She is obviously behind the scenes, claps. Yeah. Well, I mean, behind the scenes, she was obviously expressed her disappointment, but from that point on, she had made like a public stand that that was something that she was okay with that I would be going for this new role. And it made me feel more confident in going for it. So I did, and I ended up getting the role. So, I think that that's just a good way of like use the support around you that you do trust and that you do put value in to do what you want with your career. So not only that, but also just remembering that every single skill that you lack for that next position can be something that you are taught or learn. So if your boss says, well, you don't have the leadership capabilities to take on this position, you don't know delegation, you don't have the technical knowledge. Okay, well, instead of saying, well, then that position isn't for me, it's how can you support me in my endeavors into getting that position? How can you support me in learning what those skills are and gaining that technical knowledge and gaining the leadership skills that I need in order to succeed in that role? So instead of just saying like, okay, full stop, then that's not for me, it's how do I get there then? And let's work on that kind of action plan together. So just because you don't have a skill now that is required for a position that you want does not mean that you can't get it. Yeah, again, it's the growth mindset. The fixed mindset is saying like you're only as good as you're ever going to be right now. Growth mindset is I can learn anything in the world. I may be a chef on Food Network in 10 years. Like, who knows? I could learn how. Like, who says that I couldn't? So I think keeping that mindset in the workplace as well. The other big one, just like salary negotiations is have a plan for your one-to-ones. So I've already been over this a little bit and I won't touch on this much, but have your non-negotiables when you go into the room. So a list of things that you will not walk out of the room without getting clarity on. This is like the biggest thing that I help clients come up with is like those 3 things that when you walk into a meeting with your boss and you're discussing maybe promotion opportunities or your next role or, development opportunities as far as leadership and technical knowledge, what are the top 3 things that you do not want to leave the room without? And make a promise to yourself that you're not going to. So that honestly puts the agency of that entire meeting on you. It gives you the control in the room. And it says that these are the things we're going to discuss. And it's not up to you to derail that. It's up to me to control how this meeting goes. And often I see, with clients all the time, able to leave the meeting having more clarity and an action plan to get where they want to go than they ever have before. So I think just kind of those 2 main things can really help you, be your own biggest advocate for your career. Nobody's going to do that for you. Very rarely are you ever going to be offered a position on a silver platter or a promotion or a raise or anything. You have to take the initiative to do those things yourself. And that often takes a confidence, courage, and just basically the structure and the skill to get what you need in the room. So that's my number 2.
I love that, and I'm so glad that you had a good female mentor. And so I'm going to bring up something that I don't know we have not talked about before. Is have you experienced kind of that queen bee? Because I will say in male dominated industries, I want to say that one of the most toxic kind of people that I have come across is that queen bee. And the queen bee is the one who she gets herself to the top. She's in that higher management position and then she rolls the ladder up behind her and kind of leaves you yourself because she doesn't want to be thrown off her throne. And I think sometimes, especially in these male dominated industries, you do find these women that have found success, but they have carried a chip on their shoulder and they're not as willing to be collaborative and helpful. Have you experienced that in your journey, and how did you navigate that?
So there were so few females where I worked that I honestly, what I often more saw was the female at the top who was very apologetic for her success, who was, always saying that the people around me supported me in order to get where I am today. And while that's true, obviously her skills and her, ability to get to the top were purely her own. So I did see that a lot. But as far as like the competitiveness with other women, it's definitely a feeling that I've had personally. And I wouldn't say that I was at such a level of success to kind of roll up the ladder behind me. And once I had gotten to the department manager, I'd worked through all of those kind of issues on my own. But I think about it as term in 10 years, I never had a leadership table at the mills that I was at that ever had a female at it. So when I was coming up in manufacturing, looking at those leadership tables, thinking, there's nobody at that table who looks like me. So odds are only one of us is going to get there. And that made me competitive with the other women. Yeah, truly it did. And I thought, well, if she gets there, then I can. So it's got to be me, because I'm very like high achieving. I want to get to the top. And so I think that like the lack of diversity on leadership teams is really what breeds that competition. Now you have to look in the mirror and say that this is not a zero sum game. Like just because somebody else gets success doesn't mean that you can't. So, I think about this a lot in terms of other female coaches that are in my kind of business. And it's like, we're all doing the same, we're all working towards the same goal, which is to support female engineers or females in STEM, whatever the situation is. Just because our ideal client is the same doesn't mean that we're in competition with each other. It means that we're on the same mission to kind of broaden what the amount of people that we can help. So I think it's important to look at that, like look at it that way when you find yourself feeling competitive with other women in the workplace. Like, what if you and I work together to, expand what that table looks like, expand the amount of seats at it so that more of us can get there? I think that can kind of like build some camaraderie between women in the workplace for sure.
Absolutely. I would say one of the best lessons I learned, and had a couple of experiences with those queen bees that really didn't want to mentor me. And then I've had some experiences where I've had some great female mentors and I've
Yeah.
had some great male advocates. I think one of the turning points in my career was we were actually working with Chevron and I was managing like 10 of their drill sites and they called us on the carpet for our invoicing, which I didn't have a play in, but they were questioning the services that were being provided. And so I was brought along on this meeting with the owner of the company, our CFO, and then it was me to have this meeting with the Chevron executives on what are the services we're providing. And so I came with all the data. And so as they're asking questions, I was the one speaking up the most around the table because I
Mhm.
knew that was my department. I ran it, I lived it every day, 24/7 on call. And every now and again, my boss would try to interject, like, there needed to be a male voice behind me. And eventually,
Mhm.
one of the Chevron superintendents stopped my boss and he said, "What did you hire her to do?" He said, "Well, she's our service director." And he went, "And she's doing a great job. She's answering every question. Now, would you please let her finish explaining?"
Well, claps to him.
I know.
Love
And you
that.
go back to owning the company. And it was like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, he just called the owner of the company and my boss out on the carpet. And I was so terrified of the drive back with my boss, like that I just got him in trouble with the client. But it
Yeah.
really was a turning point because for him, he's like, thank you. Thank you for coming prepared. And he did start to see me in another light. And that
I
was a
love that.
turning point. And it's nice when you can build those relationships. And
Mhm.
so I would say my last point is, understand that you are going to build in your career based on your skill set. Do not undercut your worth, your value, your skill set. Don't think that you got there on the shoulders of other people. But at the same time, my best advice is make those relationships, make as many relationships and as connections as you can, male or female, in that
100%.
work environment. Because the more advocates you have to see that, like, hey, Megan's not crazy. You are overbearing. We're seeing it. Here's an outside neutral perspective.
Yeah.
Or, hey, Megan, you are really kind of getting your emotions mixed into this too much. Let's present it from a more logical, let's take the emotions out of it and let's discuss this.
Mhm.
It's just nice to have those outside perspectives, those outside connections. And so just being open and willing to collaborate and building your network and your circle and really keeping it diverse too, I think is really key to having success no matter where you are.
Totally. Yeah, and I think like if you think about the manufacturing side or like male dominated industries, like it's just as important for you to build relationships with the entry level fork truck driver as it is the mill manager of the place. Like you need to understand how to communicate with all of those people, and building relationships is important for all of them. I remember like when I was the assistant superintendent going for the superintendent position, the guys that I had built relationships for when my boss left, they advocated for me to get the superintendent position. And if I had not built relationships with them, that obviously that wouldn't have happened. And they would have been asked how they felt about my involvement or my taking over that role. And I don't know what the answer would have been if I hadn't built good relationships with them. But because of those relationships, they didn't even ask me to interview for the position. They literally put the offer on my desk. So I mean, that's the power of like truly getting to know the people that you're working with on an intimate level, and watch the power of that like grow your career on its own for sure.
Yeah. So switching gears a little bit, how are you helping clients now? Because I think more so than me, like I'm focused on health and wellness and I work with the companies, but you're really working with people that are trying to grow their career. What are
Mhm.
some trends that you're seeing? What is some advice that you could give the crowd we have here today as they try to advance in their careers?
Yeah, so my kind of the typical client that I work with is are young female engineers, kind of in the first 1 to 8 to 10 years of their experience. So, a lot of times, most of the time, they're struggling with similar things. So, like learning how to build authority in male-dominated industries, learning how to get recognized, how to get equal pay, how to get what they need out of one-to-ones, how to build confidence. That's the number one thing. That's, I think, the most intimidating part of being a female in male dominated industries is just leaving every meeting feeling like you didn't say what you wanted to say, or not presenting your ideas and then somebody else has the same one and you were just too quick, too slow to the draw, all of those things. So I really, I work with clients one-on-one to kind of just overall navigate this industry, and in turn, like, how do we get you promotions and more pay and equal pay and all of that. That's kind of like it's a byproduct of our work together, which is, okay, you're confident now, you've practiced how to be confident, you know the skills that you need and to have an effective one-to-one to negotiate your salary. So like, what do we do with all of that? And that's get you prepared for the next position. And then a lot of my clients also are, new to leadership positions, or wanting a leadership position. And, I help them from my psychology background, kind of teach them the basics of transformational and transactional leadership, and like which kind of figure out which way that they lean. And then how do we develop those skills in you so that you are respected and a respected leader, and so that you have authority when you walk into the room. That's a really hard thing for women, I think, to build, is authority, especially among a bunch of men who are your dad's age or your grandfather's age. So, and those are kind of the skills that we work on in our time together. So, and I wanted to say one thing about kind of the authoritative, like, communication piece. And this is just always something I kind of throw at my clients to be aware of, which is like confident communication, which is like, females want to put qualifiers on everything that we say. So, especially so like emails, you can think of emails as being like, you put sure, I'm not sure, but, or you say actually, or just, or you throw in a ton of exclamation marks or tons of niceties, and you spend 30 minutes crafting a 3 sentence email, and then the response from the man on the other end is great, period, send. Like, every single email that you do, edit out those words, just, actually, sure, exclamation marks, edit all of them out, and then hit send. And then when you're speaking, you can do similar things. So like, watch yourself when you're speaking and notice when you say, I'm no expert, but, or I'm not 100% sure, but, like, how, as soon as I'm saying them, you're probably recognizing how often you say things like that. And all it does is it removes authority from you as a person. So instead of saying, I'm not 100% sure, but I think that this idea would work. Well, what if you just said, this idea might work? Let's try it. Like, see how much more confidently you appear when you say something like that. So that was my last kind of point, was just like about confident communication. You can email me. I have a whole guide for this. So, and I can send it to you. It goes into more and more details about like how you can show up with less qualifiers in your speech and your emails and stuff like that. So that's always like a big one I love to throw in there at the last minute. I know you didn't ask, but I thought I'd throw it in anyways.
No, I think that's perfect. If you wouldn't mind, throw your email in the chat because even I'd be
Yeah.
interested in. So I will say, like, even me, I'm a positive psychology practitioner. So everything I do tries to be positive and uplifting. And I've been told by so many people, like, you're too positive. You need to like scale it down, just be more confident, direct to the point. So that's definitely something I think I could even work on.
Hmm.
Um, so at this time, so we're at about, 45 minutes here. I want to open it up. If anyone has any questions for me or Hannah, or if you want to share, does anyone have an experience that they'd like to